Hi, everybody. This is Fred Penner, and you are listening to the Northern Report.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Welcome to the Northern Report. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and I'm coming right at you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Here on the Northern Report, I've been aiming to shine a light on emerging and existing Canadian talent, as well as some of the legends we're still lucky to have with us today. My guest on today's show is just that, a bona fide legend. Happy to welcome Mr. Fred Penner onto the podcast today, folks. Like so many kids in and around my age, I'm sure you'll remember Fred Penner's place being on CBC television here in Canada Monday to Friday. And Fred Penner also on TV in the United States, as I've come to find out. A lot of fond memories surrounding those afternoons in the mid to late 1980s, watching Fred Penner just being a good guy on television, incorporating the music and the friendly Manitoba attitude that he's become nationally famous for. We've got some bona fide Canadian country music legends on deck here for the podcast in the coming months, but much like the season 2, how we've been rolling on so far, we're trying to broaden our horizons with a nice cross section of guests. Happy that these folks are taking the time to join me on this paltry little podcast of ours. Folks, you can get yourself a subscription to the Honky-Tonk Times by visiting thehonkytonktimes.com. You'll find my monthly column, The Northern Report, in there, along with a whole host of other great articles, interviews, and honky-tonk spotlight sessions. Of course, if you're in Nashville, you can pick one up at the Ernest Tubb Record Store. That's pretty cool if you ask me. We are going to be on stage, Sean Burns and Lost Country, next week, Friday, October 22nd, for the grand reopening of the Times Changed High and Lonesome Club in downtown Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Get your tickets on Eventbrite. If you're having a hard time dialing them up online, reach out to me. We'll see what we can do for you. But get them while you can. We look forward to being there on grand reopening night. That's all I got for you right now, friends. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Northern Report. Remember to subscribe, follow, like, share the posts, whatever you got there. Really goes a long way for helping us create a little bit of a buzz here around the show. It means a lot, and I appreciate all the support so far. Let's turn things over to my chat with Fred Penner. A veteran star of stage and television screen, Fred Penner's cornerstone philosophy remains the same. Absolute trust that his work can make a difference. A gentle giant with kind eyes and an undeniable ability to make you feel good about yourself, this musical master brings 45 years of commitment, consistency, and depth to a career that skillfully blends the many genres of performing and communication. Dubbed Mr. Multimedia by Billboard Magazine, his diverse repertoire includes a prolific 12 children's albums and countless energetically packed live shows for throngs of eager audiences across North America. A 2-time Juno Award winner and an 8-time nominee, Penner was the first children's entertainer to headline at the Los Angeles Amphitheater. A 4-time recipient of the Parents' Choice Award, the Los Angeles Parent called Fred the Canadian Minister of Positivity. He has successfully transformed children's entertainment into a family affair, offering his broad talents to speak to the family unit and express his feelings about where the world is going and what children are learning. Like thousands and thousands of other children in and around my age, I too spent many days of my youth watching Fred Penner crawl magically out of that hollow log and into our hearts, something that he did for 12 seasons and more than 900 episodes in the hit CBC TV show Fred Penner's Place. Always building on a common theme rooted in integrity and a belief in what he can do, Fred Penner has created a lasting impact that crosses the generations and continues to grow. In the year 2000, the Canadian Institute of Child Health honored Fred for his contribution to the well-being and safety of children. He is a humble recipient of the Order of Canada, the highest recognition given to a Canadian citizen, and the Order of Manitoba, a similar award from his home province. One of his albums, Happy Feet, was named Best Children's Album of the Year by the USA's Entertainment Weekly, and he is the first ever winner of the Prairie Music Award for Outstanding Children's Recording. Friends, it was my sincere pleasure to speak with Canadian icon Fred Penner, and I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. Where am I catching you?
On Vancouver Island.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, my wife and I bought a property here a number of years ago, and after COVID hit in March last year, we came out here, and I've been settled into this part of the world ever since.
Were you in Winnipeg before you moved out there still?
We were on the road at that point. We were doing the 40th anniversary Cat Came Back tour,
Mm-hmm.
and we had done a batch of Ontario dates, and in Saskatchewan, and heading into Alberta, played Calgary, and then went up to Edmonton. We were about to play the Winspear Theater in Edmonton, I think on the 13th of March or so, and then it hit. So we all scrambled, and I came back here, and the other guys went back to Winnipeg, and that's the way it's been.
I always envisioned you as a Winnipeg guy. Like, did you grow up here, or did you land here as you got a little older?
No. I was born and raised Winnipeg. My parents came from Winkler Morden area, from the Mennonite farming community down that part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm a prairie boy, hale and hearty, and so this is a bit of a variation. But as I'm approaching semi-retirement, I suppose, I'm shutting some of the things down along the way, and touring is still very strong, but over the next couple of years it'll slow down a bit, and I'll just become a more sporadic kind of player, not doing the insane kind of touring that I've been doing for 45 years.
Yeah,
that really is how long I've been on the road, since the early 70s.
Yeah, you're a real lifer in the entertainment game.
And that's the truth. Yeah, it's pretty bizarre, but that's the way it's worked.
So what was Winnipeg like when you were growing up? Because I grew up close to Toronto, so you always sort of got that rat race feeling, being even 45 minutes out of the city. I moved to Winnipeg, and it sort of sits in a gray area. It always has felt like a big small town to me. So I was wondering what it was like back then.
Well, it was fabulous. I mean, it's always been. The history of Winnipeg is quite something. The gateway to the West business, the Chicago of the North. I mean, it has lots of beautiful history because of the river and water systems. That Winnipeg really became a hub for Canada because it was centrally located. Goods and services were coming through the farming communities, the manufacturing systems that were happening. I mean, Winnipeg went absolutely through the roof. It was the fastest growing city in North America in turn of the 1900s.
Right.
So I know where Winnipeg came from. I know the essence of the city. And when I was growing up in the 50s, it was quite wild. My dad was in the Army, and we lived on Corden Avenue, just west of Kenniston. Mm-hmm. That area. Yeah. And that was this is going back, but that road, that street going towards Roblin Boulevard and Tuxedo, that was a gravel road.
Really, eh?
Yeah. I remember it being unpaved. And I remember, hopping on my bike and going into the woods nearby and finding old wagons, broken down wagons in the pit. I mean, it was quite wild back then, but it was just a wonderful, safe place to to grow and discover. And so I have my heart is deeply entrenched in the prairie and always has been. And making Winnipeg the base as my career started to grow made sense because it was in the center of the country, so equidistant basically. And as my ex-wife and I were raising our four children, that was just a perfect place to position myself. I thought of going to Toronto at one point, but then once I got out there and then realized it would have been a whole different trip trying to build it, and it wouldn't have ultimately made any difference to my career, I don't think. Because lots of connections were there in Toronto, and I've been there hundreds of times, I'm sure, over the years. But that's the way life works,
Mm-hmm. There's something about it here, and people are really passionate, and there's a strong sense of community. And I don't think you can. I mean, I certainly didn't understand the power of the community and the people here until I lived here for a little while. And it's such a vibrant arts scene here, and that's sort of been the way it's been for quite a long time. Am I right? With the music and the art here in Winnipeg is a real focal point of the community.
Yeah, that's again historically that's where it all evolved in the early 1900s. As the city was growing, as more people were moving in, as more industry was coming in, as the train systems were being developed, all of that, Winnipeg, necessarily because there's more people, the arts grows out of that. So the vaudeville scene that was strong in North America or in the States started moving north a bit. So the Walker Theater and the Pantages, for that matter, those were both just gorgeous theaters in the 1900s. And at the Walker, which was more of the vaudeville stage, you've probably heard the history that the Marx Brothers met Charlie Chaplin in the Walker Theater.
I didn't know that.
Oh well, there's a bit of history for you. Yeah, so that kind of information it gives you an idea of how really vibrant that part of the arts community was, and then of course all the musicians that have grown out of the isolation of Winnipeg is quite incredible. I think because Winnipeg didn't have any immediate influence from any other side of the country. Like in Toronto, you're dealing with New York and down the eastern coast, Vancouver. It's the whole west connection, Los Angeles. But Winnipeg, nearest city was Minneapolis. Until Prince came along and made some influence there. But Winnipeg really had the opportunity for the performers to grow and develop their own style without the immediate influence, as I said, of any other parts of the world. So I think that's where a lot of the uniqueness came from. You weren't trying to match what somebody else was doing. You were able to just come up with your own direction.
So like the isolation and the weather, you think have a lot to do with this as well?
Oh sure.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, you go into the basement.
Mm-hmm.
You pull out the instruments and you start jamming. So you jam for a few months, and then spring comes around, and you bring what you've developed over the winter, to the light of day, and it went crazy. There were some of the truly most talented people on the planet, came from Winnipeg. I was just listening to some Randy Bachman and BTO stuff last night, and jamming along with it, and they played well. I mean, it was pop rock, but very, very talented guys. Fred Turner, who's been a pal for years. I mean, those guys just did such incredible music, and bringing Burton into the mix, and Lenny Bro, and going back to some of the early comedians, David Steinberg, and there's such a range of musical and comedic talent that came from Winnipeg. and the dance world was massive. The first contemporary dance company, Rachel Brown's company, started up in the in probably 50s, 60s. The Royal Winnipeg Ballet, the arts, the visual arts that were there, because of the range of culture that came to Winnipeg from, I mean, every walk of life came in, and you build your, or you bring along the styles of different cultures for the visual art. And it's, yeah, I mean, Winnipeg really set the bar very, very high for the arts in every aspect.
And my theory was kind of always that there's such a rural influence. Like you said, your folks moved in from Winkler, Morden area, or southern
Yeah.
Manitoba. It's like there's a different sense of values, and people really are friendlier here than in other parts of the country for a city that's big.
Friendly Manitoba.
It's
That's
true.
on the license plate.
Yeah. So what was it like for you at the Penner household as a child? Was there a lot of music being played around the house on records or radio or?
Yeah, mostly not too much live. We had a piano. I didn't see or really touch a guitar until I was 15.
Oh, wow.
But listening to music and being involved in choirs from grade 3 all the way through my school years, including university, high school. I was in numerous um, operettas and stage productions, and singing became my first love, learning how to do that well, and then learning some piano, and then learning guitar when I was in my mid teens. But at home, my parents were into the classical music, lots of orchestral stuff. My dad would air conduct in the living room when he put on a symphony, and they were also into the swing music from the 40s, the Benny Goodman, Dorsey Brothers, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, that kind of stuff. So I had this wonderful range of sound that was coming into my ears on a daily basis, and I fortunately had a very good musical ear, so I could listen to those things and say, how does that harmony work? How does that pattern work? So I was developing that as I was growing up at home.
And you enjoyed that music? You enjoyed your parents' music at the time?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It was very sensitive. Certainly a lot of the orchestral stuff was just so full and vibrant. It filled my being with some of the best music that was ever written.
So what about, like, I guess you would have been 10 years old or so when people like Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly start making the scene. Does that stuff make an impact on you as a child?
Sure. That
Yeah.
was probably a little bit later than that. The Yeah, around that time, my older brother and sister. We had 5 kids in the family. I have an older brother and sister, a younger brother, and my youngest sister Susie. She was born with Down syndrome, and so I learned a huge amount of how music could affect her spirit, and that ultimately formed really strong foundation for me as I moved along, realizing how valuable music can be for a human. Uh, so yeah, so certainly Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper and Bill Haley and the Comets, those early 50s bands were really really vibrant. They were just driving out some great sound, and so I learned to appreciate and sing along to all of that. And as I said, my older brother and sister were into that music, so that was being played on daily rotation. And then once we got into the 60s, then I'm old enough to start playing some of the folk songs, and that scene that was happening, and with the Gordon Lightfoot and Joni Mitchell. I saw Joni when she was about 21 years old
Wow.
at a folk club out towards the University of Manitoba. you've driven to the U of M down Pembina Highway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when you pass Bishop Grandin and you make that left-hand turn down Bison, whatever it is, going, as close to Bishop Grandin that you can make that run. On the left-hand side, there used to be a little place called the 4D, or the fourth dimension, and it was a bit of a dive. It was a bit run down, but it had a great little stage, and I'd go there often and see some of the the folk performers coming through. And Joni Anderson, she hadn't changed her name to Mitchell yet. Her maiden name is Anderson, and she married Chuck Mitchell, and then changed her name to Joni Mitchell. But I saw her, and I was like in the front of this space, and she was like 10 feet away from me, and my heart was just pounding because she was so strong and so beautiful and vibrant. So I've got some pretty powerful Winnipeg memories of the groups that came through that certainly influenced me.
Is that where you cut your teeth as a performer? Was like playing folk clubs and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Once I learned how to play guitar, as I said, in 15, so I was heading into high school then, and I was in a number of folk groups and played the coffee house circuit in that area. And then as I got to university, again, more bands and groups came into my world, and we did mostly the folk scene. And then after I graduated from University of Winnipeg, I started playing more professionally in lounges and bars in Winnipeg, and that started building into some more touring into Ontario and Saskatchewan, and getting into a band with Al Simmons.
Yes, I definitely want to learn about that. So were you, because it was a time when, and I'm fascinated by the whole thing. My father was a full-time musician for his whole life, and starting in the late 70s, in through the 80s, it was six-nighters. They're doing six-nighters in taverns or bars, or there would have been lounges or stuff. So were you doing that kind of thing locally, like six-nighters with bands?
You bet.
Wow, what kind of music were you playing?
The main band that I was in, pardon me, we were doing some rock, semi-rock stuff. The band with Al was called Cornstalk Comedy Troupe. So we did we played some Santana comedy. We did a 10-minute Sesame Street sketch in the bars, so it was very, very playful, very engaging with the audience, certainly. And it was a very open kind of playing. It wasn't just getting to a groove and jam for a couple of hours. It was much more connected with the audience, and participation was encouraged along the way. So that was the main trip. And of course, coming from the folk scene, that was the essence of the folk music, was participation. So building that into anything I was doing was critical.
Do you remember any of the rooms you guys were frequenting in those days in Winnipeg?
Oh yeah, the first bar that I played at, my first paying gig, was at the Balmoral Hotel on the corner of Balmoral and was it Memorial?
Mm-hmm.
And the lounge was called the Can Lounge. So Fred Penner at the Can Lounge for 3 nights, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, $25 a night. So that was an opening bid. And then when the band got rolling, our favorite spots were the City Center down on Carlton, the Voyager Inn, way out on Pembina Highway, or on Portage Avenue. Not sure if that's still there.
I don't think so.
And the Voyager was out where Long and McQuaid is on Pembina, Pembina South. So in that vicinity, there was a bar called the Voyager. and we would play that, and a number of in the U of M spots, or the University of Winnipeg, so there were a batch of those, and then we would tour from Toronto to Alberta, were the provinces that we would do, and we did some television stuff along the way. A couple of series guest spots on things.
You said you went to university. Like, were you on track for some kind of civilian employment, or did you always have your sights set on being a performer?
No, I'd never considered professionally being a performer. My I'd been doing music, the vocal stuff in choirs, as I said, from my elementary years. But nobody along the way had ever, recognized any talent and said, hey, you should pursue this full time. That was never a concept. So when it finally came around in the, early morning frog here, I basically went to university. I was never a great student, but I went to university to fulfill my father's dream of having a college degree, because he was never able to do that, with his world and a war and a family and all that. So I was the doting son, and I went to university and did my first year of arts, and then realized that I was not going to be a lifelong student. So what kind of, or what subject, what discipline could I get a BA in with the option of actually getting a job? I had taken psychology and English and philosophy and economics in my first year, and economics was the only discipline that you could actually get a job after, with the Canadian government, the Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and I wrote my civil service exams, and I was apparently suited for doing that sort of work, whatever that meant. So I got my BA in economics, and was on the list to move in that direction. And at that time, fortunately or unfortunately, my sister Susie with Down syndrome, she died, and my father died a year later. So I was faced with the ultimate mortality check, and did some soul searching and realized that music was really the only thing that I felt any bliss or connection with. So I left economics far behind, and then I started playing, well, the bars, the Can Lounge at the Balmoral Hotel, and it just kept building and growing from there. And people liked what they heard, which gave me more confidence to pursue more musical directions, and that led from this to that to this to that, and ultimately a TV series, and away it went.
So after the band with Al, this would have been mid 70s?
Yep.
Yeah.
We started 73 to 1977. We did a four-year run with Cornstalk.
Playing all the time, like six-nighters, 3, 4, 6-nighters, whatever.
Yeah, for the most part, we do like a three week tour somewhere, and then we get back home and gather our senses, and then head out on the road again. So we were playing. Yeah, we were playing a lot.
You weren't maintaining other day jobs at the time. You're just playing music.
Just music. Yep.
And then your first record comes in 1979. The Cat Came Back is 1979.
Yep, that was the year the first Cat Came Back came out, the original recording, and then I made a deal with Raffi's company in Toronto to take over the Cat Came Back, and put it through his machine, because he had some really good contacts for distribution. So I worked with his company for 5 years until 1985, when we parted ways, and I started my TV world.
I think I heard you talk about it before, but if you don't mind telling me the story of how that first record got made. There was someone you met at a show or something that took interest in the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd been doing a number of performances with my ex-wife in Winnipeg, who's a modern dancer, and she had we started up a children's dance theater company called Sundance, and we would develop shows, original productions where she would choreograph and I would write songs for the audience to participate in, and we would invite kids up on stage and just take them through a theatrical journey. And after one of these shows, a local doctor and his wife and a couple of kids, they approached me and asked if I had a record, and I said no. I had not even considered that at that point, and they said, well, we would love to finance that for you. How much would it cost? I said, I have no idea. So they essentially gave me a blank check, and $8,000 later, we had the Cat Came Back had been created, and went into, it was called Wayne Finucane Studios over on Sargent Street. It's now I think it became Channels. It changed to Channels at one point, and it's still there. I forget the name that it is now, but great little theater or studio. We went in there, and I brought in a batch of original songs and a bunch of cover tunes that I really wanted to do, and including The Cat Came Back, and away we went. We created that album, and that apparently was quite a historic turn of events.
And then is that when you got on Raffi's radar? Because it's a couple years later you start putting the records out on the Troubadour label there of his.
Yeah, we were. Let's see. I hadn't recorded the album yet, and so I guess it was maybe spring of '79, because we did it in the fall of '79. So spring, maybe early summer. Raffi was playing a concert at the Fort Garry Hotel for local teachers, and so I went to check him out because I'd heard about him,
mm-hmm.
and we met, and he says, well, so what are you into? And I said, well, we're just in the process of doing my first record, and he said, fabulous. When you're done the record, he says, send us a copy, and maybe we can do some business together, because he was looking at expanding his roster. And so that's what I did. We finished the album, sent him a copy. They liked what they heard, and we made some packaging changes and some minimal recording changes, and that led to the Cat Came Back album that most people know now.
So in the years between that record coming out and the television show, that you're looking at probably 5-6 years, I guess, you've transitioned out of playing, for six-nighters or whatever, adults in bars, and now you're doing a bit more of the family interactive show. Were you touring that whole time in between?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah, from '79, as soon as the album came out, I was on the road. Playing it was perfect timing for that industry, for the family industry to grow, because the post-war generation, the boomers that I am one of, were starting to have families, and the boomers really wanted quality music for their kids, because there really wasn't anything specifically for families at that point. There was lots of folk music, which all of the performers who pursued that direction, myself, Sharon Lawson Bram, Raffi, we all came from the folk scene,
right?
So we started putting our focus onto children's music and family industry, and I started writing more songs in that direction. But because there was such a demand for quality music for the boomers, festivals started cropping up across the country. The Canada Arts Council, the Manitoba Arts Council, every province had a pretty vibrant arts councils that were really looking to support the industries, and the children's industry was certainly at the top of that. So all these wonderful international festivals started, cropping up. The first one was in Vancouver, the Vancouver International Children's Festival in the early '80s, and I started playing that, and I've done it, a dozen times at least over the years, and then right across the country in Calgary, Saskatoon, Prince Albert, Winnipeg. Um, Not so much in the East, oddly enough, but there were, this whole wave of festivals that really set up, very strong um, position in the industry, and it moved from festivals to soft seat theaters, playing um, the Burton Cummings now, or the Playhouse Theater in Winnipeg. All these major, like 1,000+ theaters across the country were wide open, and the audiences just poured in. There was a theater in Windsor, Ontario, called the Cleary Theater back in the '80s, and one weekend we played 5 shows for about 2,000 people a show.
Wow.
It was one of those, so just as an indication of how truly vibrant the industry was. And so that's the for that decade, for the '80s and about half of the '90s, that's the way it was going. It was just, take a deep breath, because this is quite a ride.
Yeah, you're there for the
Uh,
beginning of this infrastructure starting to happen. Because I was going to say, like, even pre-internet for a traveling band, if you're playing, 6 nights a week, you can get a phone book and you can call the bar or whatever in the town. But like, how are these family shows being booked and being marketed and stuff? And you're there for it.
yeah, the industry really started sort of in the mid '70s, and Raffi, certainly came on the scene. He came from his folk roots, and his mother-in-law was an elementary school teacher, and felt that there wasn't enough music for her students. So she asked Raffi, because Raffi was on a path playing the riverboat or folk clubs across the country, and as we all were, and she said, "Well, why don't you do an album for kids?" And that evolved into singable songs for the very young,
That's such a
and
great
that
title.
oh, it's great. And then singable songs too for the very young.
Yeah.
So and that went through the roof. I mean, he's a very good musician, and he brought in some fine people to support him, and those albums went viral, instantly. And so he was ready to, as I said, expand. And Sharon Wilson Brand came on about the same time, and then I was probably 2 years or so, later in the process. So it was still, groundbreaking territory for us to be playing.
So how did the television show come about?
That was a fluke. That was not expected. I had no anticipation of doing that trip. But after playing the first 5 years of the '80s, the amount of touring that I was doing was insane, but the reputation was building, and unbeknownst to me, the CBC folks were going to the festivals. They were seeing what the performers were doing. They were watching my progress, and they were on the brink of finding a replacement for the Friendly Giant, a series that was very popular on CBC Kids television in that era, but they were looking to change that up, and they found me and said, I think that would be a good new direction. So it was a cold call from Dodie Robb, who was the head of children's television in Toronto for CBC, and she called me up and introduced herself and told me the story and asked if I wanted to do a series. And I said, sure. What are you actually saying to me? And says, well, what would you like to do if you had your druthers? What would you rather do in this? What would you most like to do if you could create any kind of a children's series, in your brain? And so I thought about that. Thought, well, what direction would I like to go if this is going to happen? And because I had grown up on the prairie and natural landscape, and not wanting a series to be just knock on a door and come on in, I wanted it to have a natural feel. So the idea of developing Fred Penner's Place, and my concept of the hollow log was there, and then a number of writers came in, and we just started looking at how this could develop. And the creative teams in CBC were very excited to sink their teeth into that, both in Winnipeg and Vancouver. So we had duplicate sets in both cities, and so I would, over the course of a year, I do a couple of 3-week runs in Winnipeg, a couple of 3-week runs in Vancouver, and then I would tour in between.
So you guys would film for a few weeks at a time here, and then you would go out and do some dates, and then you would go to Vancouver and film for a few weeks, kind of thing?
Yep, as more shows were being developed, because it was a lot of writing. Was happening. So there were a dozen or more writers across the country who were submitting scripts. So we would do excuse me, we would do a run, and then then we'd regroup and look at new script direction, and then I would write songs for many of the new scripts that were coming up, and it just we just established a process over that time, and just delighted in the I mean that was some of the best fun I've ever had, the most creative work that I've done, because I was writing to task. It was a wonderful opportunity to just let my vulnerable creativity come to the front, and just all the music that was in my brain, and songs that I had grown up with, and patterns, and the rest of it. So my musical ability was put to the test at that point, and I wrote hundreds of songs for the series over those years.
Oh, it sounds like a pretty demanding schedule that you were working with. And I guess if you don't have time to sit and overthink the material, you got to learn to trust yourself and get it out pretty quickly.
Sure. No, the trust factor was high, and I've always been really good on that line for whatever reason. I do believe in my abilities, and I am a very spontaneous kind of person. So put me in a position, give me that kind of opportunity. I would fortunately always rise to the occasion, and some of the songs were pretty good tunes that have stood the test of time, and I've re-recorded them on some of my subsequent albums. It was a very, very powerful creative time for me, obviously.
I mean, did you feel pressure, like in all aspects of life, working at a schedule that's so demanding like that?
Sure. Yeah. No. It was high. I mean, those were the years for doing that. In human evolution, those are your productive years from 30 to 50. That's when your career supposedly is running, and you're building, you're building your financial situation, and you're raising your family and all of that. So, but those times were such a blink. We planes, trains, and automobiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was constant travel, and hotels, and car rentals, and then finally getting to the venue, getting up on a stage, and doing what I'd learned how to do over lifetime, and performing and interacting with the audience. It was very, very intense, and it carried me, as I said, for like 45 years.
Your celebrity is such that you're recognizable to people of all ages. When you're on TV every day, the kids are recognizing you, and so are the parents. Like, how was life for you in the 80s and the 90s when you were, on television regularly like that?
Well, it certainly was good for priming the audience attendance for the venues we're playing across the country. CBC's Fred Penner is coming to a theater near you, and many of the shows were sold to Nickelodeon Jr. in the States, and for 3 years in the late '80s, early '90s, it aired to 55 million homes in the U.S. through Nickelodeon. So that opened up some pretty serious U.S. touring along the way. I was the first children's entertainer to play at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles,
Oh, wow.
in May of 1990, and actually May the 12th was proclaimed Fred Penner Day in Los Angeles
Right
by
on.
the. So there were some silly things like that
Yeah.
happened, but we made a pretty substantial mark in the U.S. over those years, and then coming into the '90s, things just started to slow down a bit, because the industry was being, well, the whole entertainment world was changing, and so the gigs started to slow down. The TV series ended in '97. I was starting to contemplate maybe going back to economics, because I wasn't sure where things were going to go now that the series was over, that the record sales were was still maintaining, but it was a point of transition, and that's when I started playing the university and bar circuit, basically taking those kids, or following those kids who grew up with me on in the touring in Fred Penner's place, and going to where they were at the universities, and that opened up a beautiful series of concerts from Victoria to Halifax, and it was just a brilliant move to do that, and so it opened up that next wave of those kids growing into adulthood, and into parenthood, having their own kids, and then that opened up another wave of performances in the soft theaters across the country.
Yeah, I'm right in that age bracket. I'm born in '83. Like, I grew up
Okay.
with you with you on TV every day, and
Mm.
when you come out and did the pub tour and the bars and stuff, like, that must have been such a trip. But were you prepared for the amount of people that I'm sure wanted to have a beer with you or go outside with you on the break? Like, did you realize that was going to be what it was like when you were getting into that?
I never really had any expectations about any of this. I had no long range plan to, after 5 years to do an album, after another 5 years to do a TV series. That was never part of my concept or direction. So when that generation, when I was playing the bars, and these young people would approach me with tears in their eyes, with open arms, can I have a hug, Fred Penner? It was very gratifying to know that they felt that strongly about what our connection had been. But as far as anticipating that, I did not.
I mean, you said that you'd done a lot of choir singing and stuff, but I mean, you're able to connect with us watching you on television in such a strong fashion, just so calm and comfortable. Did you do theater? Were you a theater guy when you were growing up?
Yes, yeah. Through high school, I was, I did character roles in Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, and then similar kinds of musical comedy things in university. And then I was a regular in the Rainbow Stage uh, musicals in the late 70s. And in between that, when the band when Cornstalk with Al Simmons, when that was on hiatus, I'd be doing plays in Winnipeg through a couple of different theater organizations. And yeah, so I did a lot of serious drama, a lot of lighter-hearted comedic kinds of things, but certainly learning about the value of performing from a theatrical point of view. So when I'm on stage now, I bring that along with me. I bring the interaction with the audience, the awareness. One of the basic rules of performing is when you're on stage, the person at the back of the theater should feel as connected as the person on the front.
Mm-hmm.
So physically, when I'm my eyes are scanning, my eyes are looking at the front, making eye contact with kids, with parents, with grandparents, and sharing a thought. If there's a child who's a little upset, who's starting to cry in the midst of a show, sometimes I'll stop a performance, and I'll focus in on that child, and I will um, define them, because so often, and philosophically understanding how the audience dynamic works, I would see the child, I would find out the child's name, and then I would call out to the child, Sean, hi, Sean, you see me up here? And I would wave, to that specific child, because so often, and here's the philosophy part, is when young children come to a space, with 1,000 people, it can be very overwhelming. And I think the child, because they listen to me on recordings or seen my program, which is a very personal opportunity for them, it's just me and the child together. All of a sudden, and the child, I think, starts to feel that this Fred Penner guy is my personal entertainment unit, and here I'm on stage, here he is on stage, and there's all these other people, like, what are you doing here? So the overwhelming feeling hits the child, and they start to cry, or that's my that's my assumption. Not that. So if in fact the child does feel overwhelmed, stopping the program for a moment, identifying the child, giving them a space, and recognizing what they are feeling, and then that allows me to go back into the performance with inclusion to them. So then in the course of the show, I will refer to that child again. If I'm doing um, like ABCs and Twinkle Twinkle, I'll say, "Hey, Sean, I've got a song for you to sing. Okay, you can help me. You specifically can help me with this song." And all of a sudden, it's, oh, I've got, Fred's talking to me. I am here. That kind of awareness of the value of performing and coming from my theatrical background was just, I think, gave me a different style, obviously, of approaching an audience than than the other performers.
Yeah, it's a really powerful tool to still make it feel so intimate, even though you're, watching on TV or in a room of 1,000 people. And I'm wondering, like, surely everybody has a shitty day, and you're under these travel demands or production demands. Like, did you have any tricks to to sort of forget about a bad day or a rough time and then just do your job, to get into that character?
No real tricks. Certainly the touring, would take its toll, and there were times where the distances between one place and another did not really work out with my body.
Yeah.
And I had, I think in the course of my 45 years, I had to cancel maybe 3 gigs. I had a very solid constitution, and I was able to get on the stage, because the stage is where I could relax. Everything else was stress. To make sure your car's got gas in it so you don't run out before the next gig. It was details, just a constant flood of details. And no matter how much support I had with that from managers or agents, the rest of that, I still had to deal with it in truth. So it was challenging on the road, but getting on stage, as I said, was relaxing for me, because I didn't have to think about any of the other stuff. All I had to do, and still all I have to do when I'm on stage, is present my material, the songs that I want to share with you, to the best of my ability. And every audience is different. Whether I've done the cat came back, 100, 1,000, 10,000 times, I will always give it the same energy, the same degree of focus, because that's what the audience deserves. They've spent some money. They've made the commitment to pack the kids into the car, to come to a venue, to do this. So it is my responsibility as a professional performer to give them the very best that I possibly can. And that's always been that if that's a trick, well, perhaps that connects. But it's always been that for me is my responsibility, in taking myself seriously from that point of view was critical.
Thank you very much, Mr. Penner. It's a great pleasure to speak with you. I grew up with you on the TV every single day. My mother was so excited when I told her I was speaking to you on the phone today.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, say hi to your mom for me.
I appreciate you taking the time, and look forward to coming to see you when you're in Winnipeg next.
Oh, that's kind of you. Thanks so much, Sean. You be well.
Thanks. Well, friends, I hope that you've enjoyed my chat with Fred Penner. Huge thanks to Mr. Penner for taking the time to share parts of his great story with us. You can find some of Fred's music wherever you're streaming for a nominal monthly fee, or check him out at fredpenner.com. And know that there is a lot of old Fred Penner's Place clips available on YouTube. Follow along with the Northern Report Spotify playlist to hear music from the folks that I've interviewed here on the podcast and those covered in my column in the Honky-Tonk Times, along with a whole host of other great Canadian artists. Our logo was created by Boots Graham of Boots and the Hoots, and music on the show today courtesy of Sean Burns and Lost Country, The Divorcees, and Skinny Dick. From local legends to regional stars to the cream of the Canadian crop, you're going to find it all here on the Northern Report. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll chat later. Hey, bud, you got something good for me?
No, but I'd like to check in on myself.